In the human years, what's that, about 9?
For a smaller breed, I think we actually multiply by more than 7, I heard. So I'm not sure. I always consider her my age because we started taking glucosamine at the same time.
So I'll do this with glasses on. This one's supposed to happen to me, wearing glasses and hearing aids. A few years ago, I felt invincible, but it's catching up with me. So our theme today, I was told, was storytelling. So it just so happens that the foreword in my latest book, which is really my second book, I like to say latest, it sounds like I've written a bunch, but just 2. But the foreword is about storytelling, and it's written by Michael Curry. The foreword. Does that ring a bell for anybody?
You mean the basketball player? What did you say?
The foreword is written for my second book. It's written by Michael Curry.
Who is a basketball player?
And a bishop, right?
Bishop.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
because I heard your.
It probably is a Curry basketball
I
player.
heard your.
Actually, he's the
presentation before.
presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church in the United States, maybe in the world. I'm not an Episcopalian, so that works. But he's also noted for something else happened just a few years ago.
I remember that.
You've heard of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry?
Yes.
He officiated at their wedding in, where was that? I don't know, Buckingham Palace, wherever it was. No, that was, I'm sure it was in the cathedral. But they had their choice, of course, of any clergy person in the whole wide world, and they picked Michael Curry. Michael and I go back about 20 or 25 years. We did events together over the years, and in May we were together in Minneapolis at an event. And he used to travel by himself, but I noticed this time, as a fairly new presiding bishop, he came with an entourage of people. And I always just referred to him as Michael, but a member of his group, his entourage, informed me that I should address him as the presiding bishop from that day forth. So let me read what presiding Bishop Curry wrote as a foreword. Note I didn't call him Michael. We are storytellers, whether around a burning fire or within a large theater. We have long sought out stories and asked for more. Stories not only inform or entertain, but if we let them, they tap into the deeper parts of our souls and psyches. Stories inspire us, challenge us, shape us. Tell me the old story, the old gospel hymn proclaims, of unseen things above. Tell me the story slowly, that I may take it in. The prophets of old often shared wisdom through stories. Jesus told stories without explanations, but often just letting them impart meaning on their own. The Bible is an epic story that begins with creation's birth and concludes with new heavens and a new earth, and in between takes on a long journey through God's interactions with the human family. Stories are powerful. With the words, "A stream of light shines through a tiny hole," author David Howell welcomes the reader into a story of another place, another time, introducing us to fascinating characters. Sam, the modern-day soldier buried alive by the Taliban. Samantha, Sam's fearless and compassionate Scottish ancestor. Charles, the principled and down-to-earth minister whom Samantha comes to love. Brody, a young and inquisitive beggar thief. We quickly become fellow travelers and follow them along their various journeys, from a 19th century courtroom and jail in Scotland to a battlefield in Afghanistan, from an old ship making the arduous trek across the Atlantic to a refugee center today. Along the way, we learn about the harsh realities of slavery and the perilous work of the Underground Railroad, and we discover ways in which our own time is influenced by what has come before. The story begins with both terror and a dream. It ends with, well, you'll need to learn that for yourself, for that is what stories are about, drawing us into their realities and in the process impacting our own. Presiding Bishop Michael Curry. We'll come back to Bear Dream in just a minute, my latest book. First, I want to talk a little bit about my first book, Tethered to an Appalachian Curse. I've spent a lot of time over the years with notable people like Presiding Bishop Curry, Jimmy Buffett's lead guitarist. 2 weeks ago, spent several nights at our house in Toppin on my way to New York to meet up with Jimmy and Paul McCartney and what was the other guy? Can't remember his name. Still hung up on his name. Billy Joel. They were going to do a kind of a private thing together to celebrate Paul McCartney's birthday. I once spent 2 days in Atlanta with Nobel Peace Prize winner Archbishop Desmond Tutu before he died. I spent a day with Garrison Keillor, the late Wobegon guy, public radio. Spent time with lots of civil rights leaders, Andrew Young, Joseph Lowry, who started the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he was a close associate of Dr. King. I spent a day with two U.S. senators not too long ago, and an evening with poet Natasha Trethewey, who was not too long ago, the U.S. poet, help me say it, Laureate. I accidentally had lunch with Michael Andretti, son of Mario Andretti, the India car drivers. I've been interviewed by the New York Times and Time Magazine for my views on religion. That's a whole another crazy story. And we've all had brushes with fame, no big deal. For me, the contrast is to where I grew up that makes it so interesting and why people encourage me to write a book. Because they want to hear about my upbringing. They knew I grew up in the North Carolina mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, and they knew that I grew up dirt poor. The Great Depression that started for most people, well, for everybody in the U.S. in 1939, it was over in 5 or 6 years or so. In the mountains, the high mountains of North Carolina, the Great Depression was still on in the 1950s and the 1960s. We were all poor, well, at least the working people. In school, I was one of the kids called out over the school loudspeakers to go to the gym for free dental and medical exams. LBJ started anti-poverty program, and they would announce it. They would say the students were going to go call out. They live below the poverty level, so they can go to the gym and get free dental care or medical care or an eye exam. And that wasn't too bad in elementary school, but you get in high school and you're trying to hang out with the cool, some much better off kids in town. That was awfully embarrassing. I grew up on the side of a mountain. I could see one abandoned house in the distance. My mother finished the 2nd grade, but had to quit school to help with the 15 brothers and sisters that came into the world after her. My father was much better educated now. He got to finish the 5th grade before he had to help on the family farm. Father was a feldspar miner, the white stuff that goes into ceramics. My mother worked in a blue jean factory. Both made minimum wage their entire lives. They would never give them a wage, those companies they worked for, because they were uneducated and they had no leverage. So they just kept them at minimum wage. So a few years ago, people started asking me to write a memoir, my life history, of how I got from dirt poor, murderous hillbilly, bootlegging, moonshining Appalachia to today. I resisted at first, but then COVID hit, and I had a little time on my hands. We didn't go anyplace much, so I thought I'd give it a try. A few months later, I had tethered to an Appalachian curse ready to be published, and I'm not going to say much more about that, except that the curse was when my mother, who was pregnant with me, was condemned to hell by a fundamentalist snake-handling preacher. So to some degree, the book is about trying to get rid of that curse. And I ended up in a seminary to get a theology degree, but that was long after I debunked that curse. But the rest of the book is about trying to get myself out of the mountains and get educated and do some things in the world. Has anybody read Hillbilly Elegy or seen the movie? It's sort of like that.
Pardon me, I refuse.
What's that?
I would refuse. I can't stand his politics.
Oh, yes. That's why I didn't mention the author's name. Demon Copperhead is a recent book similar to my story by Barbara Kingsolver. And that's really, really popular and selling well. But I think my book is just good. And so that was published. Tethered to an Appalachian Curse was published about 2 years ago. Now it's not sold a million copies or anything like that. But I have been invited a lot of places to read. I'm here today. I was invited last fall to the Carolina Literary Festival. I got to read there. I've been to the Wild Goose Festival and several other places to read. But I felt like an accidental writer. I don't even know if I am a writer, but they just kind of, books have kind of come out of me, at least two. I'm pregnant with another one. I don't know when I'll go into labor, but maybe in the fall and winter. And the other thing after I wrote the first book was, and I understand a lot of writers have this, you wonder if it was a fluke. You wonder if it was a one-hit wonder. Could I do this again? If I had to make a living doing this, could I write another book? And my first book was really easy because it was a story of my life and my stories. So I wanted to see if I could write a second book. I love the Outlander series on Netflix. You've seen that.
Oh, yeah.
So I wanted to write a book about a Scottish minister, maybe about that time. I actually started a little bit later in the mid-1800s. My character, my Scottish minister, ant ran across me. One of my degrees is in theology, so I felt comfortable writing about ministers and their work. In the book, the Reverend Charles Stewart is no ordinary minister in 1849 Scotland. He's a distant relative of Mary Stuart, Queen of the Scots and of the Stuart dynasty. But he's too progressive for his small town in Scotland. He helps a 10-year-old orphan pickpocket avoid hanging, but when the young man gets in more trouble, the judge puts them both on an overloaded sailing ship bound for Wilmington, North Carolina. A beautiful, red-headed bartender has a big-time crush on the minister, so she slips aboard the ship as well. They avoid the storm of the decade in the Atlantic, for it was a hurricane. Of course, they didn't have weather reports to know what was really going on then. The ship almost sinks, is blown into the Chesapeake Bay, and runs aground near Whitestone in 1849. Soon, the three of them are helping with the Underground Railroad, helping people who have been enslaved in the South cross the Rappahannock River. There was no bridge then, in a dilapidated old boat, and helping these people make their way under the cover of darkness from one safe house to another to freedom in the North. But this comes at a great personal price. I'll let you read, if you choose, about that in the book. And if you pick up Buried Dreamer and start reading it, you might think you're reading the wrong book, because the book begins with a soldier, a graduate of Lancaster High School and the University of Virginia, buried alive by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Delirious, the soldier dreams about the shipwreck in 1849. After finally being rescued and after hospitalizations in Germany and Walter Reed Hospital, the soldier returns to Whitestone and Kilmarnock and does some digging and realizes the survivors of the shipwreck in 1849 were ancestors. The soldier then begins a life trying to do the same kinds of social justice work that the ancestors did. So I'll read you a couple of endorsements for Buried Dreamer. Robert Wicks is a psychologist and has done some wonderful things on a global scale. He's also a friend of mine. For instance, he trained the social worker who treated the survivors of the Rwanda massacre. I guess that's been 10, 15 years ago. But that's how well regarded he is as a psychologist. So he says something here. With a cast of memorable characters for us to walk alongside, David Howell reminds us that when fear dresses itself up as privileged violence, it becomes especially dangerous. Howell demonstrates that through time, when the spirit of love is present, hope and true faith both inspires and prevail. This historical novel is an essential book for us today when so many have turned their backs on the lessons of history and tailored their overall perspective as well as their personal interpretation of sacred scripture and religion to their own needs and prejudices. Robert J. Wicks, PhD. And this endorsement is from Jimmy Buffett's lead guitarist.
I'm more likely to pay attention to him.
Yeah.
Actually, I tell him, and it's true, I said, you're a much better writer than I am. And you're going to hear it right here, the way he puts things together. And I said, you're going to have quite a memoir to write someday, your travels with Jimmy Buffett, and I've heard a lot of the stories. But anyway, this is what Peter says about this book. If Indiana Jones was a kind-hearted, progressive Presbyterian minister, banished from 19th century Scotland, along with his cadre of fellow disciples, the bereaved, the benevolent, the bandit, and the beautiful, you might have an inkling where Buried Dreamer will lead you. With imagination and engaging characters, David Howell points to the Creator's timeless song that calls us to live into the ways of justice, purpose, and place, and to never quit the courageous fight for all who have been denied their own. Peter Mayer, lead guitarist, Jimmy Buffett's Chorway for Man. So that's kind of the backstories to these two books. That's about my 20 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Almost exactly. So, yeah. So hey, we're good. We're good.
Yeah.
So I got to play a little bit of the 20 main game. When were you at the seminary?
Let's see. 78
Did you ever take classes with Dr. Jimmy Luther Mays?
Oh, James Mays, yes.
James Mays.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Old Testament,
Yeah.
or I like to say First Testament.
Well, a quick story. I had a double major at UVA in English and Religious Studies, and I was in the office of one of the religious study professors, and I looked down on his desk, and there was one of Jimmy Luther books, Jimmy Luther Mays' book. So I put my hand on it and I said, "Oh, you read Jimmy Luther's book?" He said, "You know Jimmy Luther?" And I said, "Yeah, I went to high school with his daughters." And he said, "Well, he's the foremost authority in the world on the minor prophets." And I said, "Minor
Foremost
prophets?
authority on
The minor prophets." And I said, "I'm not a bit surprised, the minor prophets." Yeah.
that would be the Obadiahs and
I don't know.
Joel.
So how is it that you know Jimmy Buffett's lead guitarist?
How?
Uh-huh.
I used to actually I started an event for clergy that became the largest of its kind in the world. And we would have lectures and sermons and musicians to come in, entertain in the evening. And somebody told me that Jimmy Buffett's lead guitarist liked to perform for church gatherings. And I said, "Really? You've got to be kidding me." And this person said, "No, he's the son of Lutheran missionaries that were in India. And in fact, he named his daughter India after his son." And so I kind of looked into him and had some conversations with him. And for church groups, he does a whole different style of music for the most part. And whenever I could, over the years, when he was not traveling with Jimmy, we'd have him in for the event. And he's been to visit. When we lived in Richmond, he came to he was passing through. You know, it's a free place to stay. So he stayed a couple of nights with us in Richmond. We'd gone up and hiked the Appalachian Trail, part of it, and come back and stayed at our house. The next morning we got up and Mary Ann had fixed breakfast, and the trash can was full. And so Mary Ann started tying up the trash can and getting ready to take it outside. And Peter insisted, "Let me take this out. Let me take it. Where are your trash cans outside?" And he took it out, and after he turned the corner and went outside, she said, "Wow, now I could tell all my friends that Jimmy Buffett's lead guitarist takes out my trash."
I may have gotten a little bit lost. I think I was following how your characters were related to Scotland. What is your own background with Scotland? How far back does your Scottish heritage go? Or do you know?
I'm not sure. I did the 23andMe DNA testing, and I'm not as much Scottish as I thought. English, probably more English, Scottish, and Welsh. That's Wales, right?
Yeah.
So, not through 23andMe, but it's a family lore that we are descendants. Howell are descendants of Howell the Good. And he spelled Wales. He spelled his name Hwyel, where I am Howell. But in the years and the migration and immigration, the name got changed. But the family lore is that we descended from him, King of Wales. He's called Howell the Good because he had a set of laws that governed Wales that were supposedly just and fair and good. So he's Howell the Good.
Well,
6th century or something.
Kenzie is a Welsh name. My father's family were Welsh Quakers, and Kenzie is fairly common in Wales, but it's always Kinsey.
Yeah.
And according to our family lore, one of our ancestors ran a little foul of the law. Then he decided by changing the spelling of his name, he would avoid, more likely to avoid capture.
Mm-hmm. Good story.
Yeah, you can't always trust family. Or I have a poem in the new book about my great grandmother, Mary O'Connor Connolly Kinsey, and we all were taught that she was from Ireland growing up. You know, my great grandmother from Ireland. Well, we came to find out that she was actually from the great Irish city of Philadelphia. her parents were both Irish, and they came over during the potato famine. But she was actually born in Philadelphia and is buried in Philadelphia.
Okay, so we have a quick story. We're in Ireland and we're looking for one of his family's grave sites. It's a tiny, tiny little town, and the cemetery is about as big as this road. And we thought, we should be able to find this pretty quickly. And the O'Connors. And so we're looking around, can't find what seems to be the gravestone, and we come across these workers there, and we ask them, and they go, oh yeah, we can help you. Well, 5 minutes later, there are 3 O'Connors, and none of them are right. So we decided to come back the next day, and we're looking around, and we think we have a better sense of where to go because of his
Yeah, I
brother-in-law.
texted my brother-in-law.
And so, we're looking around, and this little tiny man comes up with these twinkling blue eyes. He's quite old, and he says, I'll help you find it. And in like 3 minutes, he found it. And so, his name was Patrick Tobin.
This is all on page 14, by the way.
And so, anyway, so Patrick is looking at the gravestone, and he goes, oh, that O'Connor. Because,
She was Tobin.
she was Tobin before she was O'Connor.
married O'Connor. She's my great aunt. That's Ireland. So we're all one big family after all.
Yeah, and so, anyway, at the end of the conversation, he apparently lived across the street, goes to this little cemetery every day at lunchtime to visit his late wife's grave. And so, I said, could I give you a hug at the end of it? He's so darling. And he goes, oh, yes, you'd make my day. And so I start hugging him, and he literally picks me up off of my feet and kisses me on both cheeks. And he only comes up to about here on me.
Now, meanwhile, she's trusting. I'm saying this is one of the fairy folk. This has got to be one of the fairy folk. But they tend to wear our dead, so we have to respect them. Right?
I think